Hello everybody and welcome to a new episode of Streamable Horror. And for our first episode we will be looking at the Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is for right now available on Netflix, but that might change sometime soon. While some of you might be thinking that as an obscure horror film, most of the horror films that are on streaming services are going to be obscure, very low budget, weird horror films. So let's get on with the movie. The movie is about two guys who are trapped inside of a coroner's office because they are working on a lady that is called Jane Doe because they don't know who it is. But then they slowly start to realize that she's not just a normal human being, and then there's a small twist at the end. But it's basically about how the dead bodies, after they start to cut her open, start to come alive inside the coroner's office and start attacking and trying to kill them. And the plot of this film is actually pretty interesting to watch throughout. It's not a boring film whatsoever. It keeps you on the edge of your seat the entire time. And the movie isn't actually very boring considering that it's a very short watch, only being about an hour and a half long. This film is not boring at all. It is one of the most interesting horror films you'll ever see. And all the acting is pretty well done in general. Except for there's some moments that are kind of iffy, but besides that, most of the acting is generally extremely well done throughout. So you don't have to really worry about this film not being very interesting and boring, because it's not. It's one of the most interesting horror films you can watch that's on Netflix or Amazon. Because Netflix and Amazon can have some slow burn movies, but for a slow burn, this one is not actually very slow. Now let's get to the next portion of this review. This film is not for the squeamish of heart. And if you think I'm not being serious, seriously, do not watch this movie if you can't handle any type of gore, because the gore in this is literally insane. It's about a coroner. So of course they're going to be cutting open dead people, and that's going to be really graphic and very violent. So seriously, if you're squeamish at all, do not watch this movie. Trust me. You will probably get sick because of how graphic it is. It is extremely graphic and extremely violent due to it being about a coroner. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of gore. And just know what you're getting into. Because I would not recommend this to you if you have any sort of, if you can't stand a violent movie, you cannot watch this movie because this film is extremely violent and extremely graphic. So if you can't handle that stuff, don't watch this movie. You'll be just fine. It's a great movie, but you'll just have to sit this one out because this is really violent and very graphic, especially for its content. And this is one of the most graphic films you can ever watch. It's extremely graphic just because of its nature. So that's why I'm saying this one. If you are into that stuff, you might like it. But if you don't like that graphic sense of the movie, then you will not like this movie at all. This film is very effective at building up suspense throughout the entire film. As soon as you know where the coroner's office is and you see the location, you automatically know this is going to be a very suspenseful movie throughout. And if you guess that, you are most likely correct because this is one of the most, if not the most suspenseful movies I have ever seen. Throughout the entire thing, it's just building up to the slow tension of what's happening and what's wrong with this lady and why is this happening to them. And when they start to get to that twist, then you start to realize what's happening. And that becomes even more frightening because then you realize they're not going to make it out of there alive. And it basically builds up to that gigantic ending. And it pays off. It's one of the better payoffs I've ever seen in a horror film. But it's not the best. But it's just better than most. Basically, what I'm getting at is this film is extremely effective, and it makes sense because it's supposed to be. If it wasn't, it would not work, but it works. So that means that it's super effective, which is amazing for a horror film to do, because that means they're doing something right. So now let's get to the final section before the final thoughts. I'm going to express this to you one more time. If you are squeamish, do not watch this movie. This film is extremely graphic, so this movie is not made for you. But if you are a horror fan, you will love this movie. This is one of the better horror films that are out there, and for good reason. It's a great director who made the movie Troll Hunter, which is apparently one of the better found footage films out there. But if you are a horror fan, would I recommend watching this movie, because this is a very intense horror film, and it's more made for like a horror fan, because most people that aren't horror fans do not like intense horror films, and this is a very intense horror film, like extremely intense. And it's also a slow burn, which most people that watch horror films will like, and most slow burns are extremely slow in a midsection. So expect a slower midsection, but besides that, it is one of the better horror films out there, and I would recommend it for most people. But let's finally get to final thoughts and recommendations. Finally, I'm gonna say that if you have Netflix and you're a horror fan, you have to watch this movie. This is one of the best horror films on Netflix that you can watch anytime, and it's gonna be on there for a while, most likely. So I would say that I recommend this film, because this is one of the best horror films on Netflix. So watch it as quickly as you can before it disappears.
Like and subscribe for more amazing content.